and it will actually kill the soil completely. And it's not at all, the lawn itself is better than this as far as the habitat and taking care of the earth and lawns and water percolation. So, but it's an interesting, people who are not gardeners think this is quite fine. This is a solution to the lawn they had to grow and the water they had to waste. So they retire their lawn and put something like this in, and that's not at all what we want to do, especially being here at Annie's, which is selling plants. We want to sell good plants and the right plants. So that's really where I'm going to go with all of this. It's really exciting for me to talk about plants specifically. Since this book has come out now a couple of years, a lot of you may know the East Bay Mud book that came out 25 years ago. That's now out of print. So this book became the replacement for that through Timber Press. And Nora Harlow, who is my co-author on this, worked at East Bay Mud and wrote the first book. But we both realized when that book was done, it needed an update. There were some mistakes in it. The most egregious one was a sedge called Berkeley sedge that we put in the book that restoration people assumed it was a native plant because it was called Berkeley sedge. And at that time, no one really knew. As a little side story, that plant had come from the old Magic Gardens. I don't know if any of you remember Magic Gardens in I think it's Richmond. When it went out of business, my friend John Greenlee, who's a great grass person, went through the nursery just picking out what was left over, and found this bright green sedge, unwatered, growing in the corner of this now deserted nursery. He said, "This has got to be a great plant." And so he got it, started propagating it, and this is from Berkeley. This is the Berkeley sedge. Well, John is a great grass person, and he doesn't really care about origins of plants. He just wants to sell cool plants. And so that plant got introduced as Berkeley sedge and got in our book as Berkeley sedge. And I even heard of 2 different legal cases that were happening from restoration groups had spec'd out that plant in native gardens to turn out it wasn't native. So anyway, the point being, this book has been revised, and we wanted to expand the region to be more about the whole West Coast, which is the whole West Coast is a summer dry climate, which I'm about to show you. But before I really go, as far as way of introductions, I have a website, the Summer Dry website. We have a newsletter monthly, comes out, so go there if you want to sign up for it. And on the Instagram, I'm really having a lot of fun with Instagram. I post a bunch of times every week for the Summer Dry account, and there's always new plants going up there, just talking about it, and we often get some nice feedback. This week, a couple of days ago, I put puya up there. We're going to talk about today, puyas, and getting some feedback from people about where they grow and where they come from and which ones are available in the trade. So the Instagram account really is fun. And this is it still working? Yeah, sorry. Let's go back. I love making this the first picture to show because it's such an elaborate garden. This is at the Huntington in Southern California, and 10 years ago or so, they revamped a lot of their gardens and added what's called the California garden, which is what this is from. And it's meant to be gardens that are adapted to California climates, which for me, as advocating for summer dry climates, it's a wonderful place because they have seemingly unlimited resources for gardening and plants, and they do a really good job and do a spectacular job on the entry gardens now. This particular photograph was taken 7 years ago when we first started this book. It's actually the lead photo for the book. This is what you can do. But what's fun is you won't see this today. If you went back to the Huntington, they changed this garden out. And as gardeners do, and as Annie does, these places change and gardens do change. And that's part of the fun of why we like to garden. We like that change. We like to say, try a new plant or try again something we killed already. That's what gardeners, but that's what gardeners do. And it's also why I really want to show gardens that are mature. And talk about gardens as ecotones. An ecotone, specifically in by definition, is a interface between 2 houses, 2 different systems. And a garden, that's what we do. We put together plants from disparate systems and make our own ecotones. So I like to think of gardens as ecotones, and the best ones have a variety of plants and work well with nature. This is one of my top favorite gardens to photograph, in UC Davis, the Storer Garden. It's been around for 30 years, maturing, and the horticulture department there in the Arboretum use it as a trial in a way. It doesn't change a lot. So, but as all of our gardens do, they change gradually, and sometimes we don't even realize how they have changed. And that's why this garden is so wonderful. It's hot. It's inland in Davis. They do water. They water twice a month, so it's not a no water garden, but it's a really good ecotone. It's a garden that's evolved with plants, and it is now an ecotone, as all of our gardens are. Their gardens are ecotones. So I'm going to digress a little bit and talk a little bit about the science of our climate. We are in a summer dry climate where I like to say dry summers are not drought. It's normal. It's what we expect to be. There are different definitions of drought. Some people say drought is any period of no rain. I like to think of drought as an unexpected time of no rain. So in our climate, I call it a summer dry climate. It's not drought. For us, drought is when it doesn't rain in the winter. That's drought. But I won't go into all the detail of this, but these arrows point out. Is there a pointer on this? But anyway, the arrows point to that particular classification, which are all summer dry. So they're all parts of the world. They're these ecotopes that are summer dry, and we can get them a little more narrowly defined, as you can see here, as the summer dry climates of the world. What I pretend particularly informative is this. I don't like the term Mediterranean gardens. It's very informative, but I find it's limited. Mediterranean, and also when we did the first book, we had a lot of consultants who rebelled against calling it a Mediterranean climate book because the native plant people were not incensed, but were aware that people might not recognize that there are plenty of other plants in this world that are adapted to our climate that are not from the Mediterranean, particularly native plants. So we came up with the term summer dry to encompass the climate. And what's really fun to notice, this map came from the Pacific Bulb Society. Look, this is not Mediterranean. This part of western or eastern Washington, that's not Mediterranean. It's cold, much colder than Mediterranean, but it's dry in the summer. And so that's where I'm starting to want to use that term to inform gardeners. There's a lot of plant material from around the world that's not just from the Mediterranean or just from the traditional Mediterranean climates. This is an extrapolation from that map, again from the Pacific Bulb Society, that shows the California and all the really individual ecotopes that exist just within that one summer dry climate. Those of you who use the Sunset Western Garden book know they already have 24 zones. There are a lot of different ways to look at our own little gardens, our own little regions. And it's also why it's so important that we as gardeners have places like Annie's and books like mine to talk about the different plants, because each of us has a different garden. We have a different location, and we want to know, how it works. So it's simplified here. These are the 5 major ecotopes that are Mediterranean or summer dry climates in the world. And this book is done as an encyclopedia. But I want to help people understand the systems by organizing this talk and my next project around the zones themselves, around where they come from. The Mediterranean, from my limited experience, is pretty rocky. We have more clay here. In Western Australia, it can be more sandy. Is that still working?
Yeah, that's
okay.
So
I've decided it'd be really fun, especially for this presentation, to organize the plants by the regions of the world. So I'm going to go through. There's a checklist. I looked at Annie's catalog to find out which ones Annie actually sells that I have experienced and seen myself. And we'll talk exactly about those today. And I'm sure the team here will be happy if you buy these plants or go shop for other plants. But it's also, this is actually the time of year to be planting. Those of you who know, And we hope the rains are coming by late October, November. And any plants we put in now and water in now, it's still warm enough that roots will get established and it will take off. Most of our best plants grow mostly in the winter underground. The roots go out, they connect with their fellow plants, connect with the soil. So you want them in now while the soil is still warm enough for them to get in, and then let them do their thing in the winter. And if it doesn't rain in the winter, that's when you need to water. I've been advocating for years to people on our Summer Dry newsletter, the winter is a time to water. During the past drought we've had 2 great years, but before that we had a long dry winters, and that's the time to water. Because if the plants that are adapted to summer dry climates get water in the winter, they can go through the summer. They may not look great. A lot of our best plants do want a little water, and we'll talk about that. But if it doesn't rain in the winter, that's when you have to sort of suck it up, look at your water bill, and water, because the plants are growing at that time. But they're all from different parts of the world, and we're going to start with Australia. This is Anaxanthus harmony, which I don't see here today, but is actually now's the time to say the plants I talk about here that may not be in Annie's inventory today. You can probably be on a waiting list or find it if they still intend to propagate them, or you can find a substitute. In the Anaxanthus kangaroo paws, there are a lot in the trade that have been hybridized over the years. This one, Harmony, is particularly good. This photograph I know is 20 years ago. I photographed, so it's been in the trade for a long time. That tends to show the propagators who propagate it, and a place like Annie, they don't propagate this and stuff. They buy it from wholesalers. The great thing about Annie's is they propagate a lot of their own stuff, and so it's unusual things you won't find at the big box stores or anywhere else. So it's such a treasure to have it here. On the other hand, as a practical matter, something like these plants, they probably buy out from hybridizers who have a license to distribute it. It's a whole other business talking about the nursery business and which plants are hybridized. I mean, these Arctotis, they're hybridized by literally $1 million hybridizers who then sell them to wholesalers. But ultimately, people like Annie's or any small local independent nursery pick ones that they know work for their client in their region. So it's really important to support the local sellers. But this Harmony Anaxanthus is really, it's so clean. It's really a golden yellow. So it's the kind of thing you imagine how echoes of this color in your own garden. It's a really good plant. But as I say, it's not a native plant. It's adapted to our climate. I should look at my own little cheat sheet here to make sure I cover everything. I have this is from Chile, and I'll talk about Chile a little more. Can you guys see the names underneath at the very bottom? Maybe not. Prosenthera rotundifolia. It's another great plant that is adapted to our climate, and it can act like a hedge. You can shear it back. It's really adaptable as a hedge, but it also has fragrant flowers, so it really works really well. Like in this picture, you can mix it into a border with other plants. But it's from Chile originally, and I've actually been lucky enough to go to Chile with a horticultural group and see the native habitats. And like in California, you go out in the native habitat, you see a plant that could be a garden plant, until the gardeners and the hybridizers get a hold of it and they know what to do with it. That's happening now in Chile more and more. There's more great plants from Chile. Of all the other summer dry climates of the world, I think Chile, it might be the most adapted to us in the west coast of the United States. The Mediterranean is pretty rocky. There's a lot of plants, rocky. South west Australia is a phosphorus deficient. A lot of plants really don't do that well. South Africa is there's some summer rain that comes in. The point being, Chile is a great source of plants. And so I don't know if Annie's marks their plants from region, but I think there should be more plants from Chile that will start being adapted to our climates.
Saxon, what is the name of that house?
The last one? Prosenthera. It's also called mint bush. I think Annie's, I don't see it here, but it's called mint bush. It has a minty smell to it. So And I just saw this next plant is out of place because this is a eucalyptus. I just put this together yesterday, started shuffling the order of my presentation, and this snuck in. It may have, it may be duplicated in the Australia section later, but I put it in place here because eucalyptus have a bad rap. A lot of them are bad. The ones that were first introduced to California, the tall blue gums with a peeling bark, they're like fire hazards. They're Roman candles waiting to go off. That was the chief culprit of the Berkeley Oakland fire 20 years ago, was that the blue gum eucalyptus. So eucalyptus in general got a bad name for that. But there are many eucalyptus. There's hundreds of eucalyptus in Australia, and a number of them are in the trade. This one is not. Andes doesn't sell a lot of trees, but I included this as an example of a eucalyptus that does stay small. It's a small eucalyptus, pauciflora, small being small leaf, small flowered, I guess, but it's a really nice garden adapted plant. And I would like to have more trees and shrubs in our gardens. I love the annuals and perennials that we add for color and interest, but that's transitory. That changes every few years. The shrubs and trees, they're the backbones, and we need to have plants that are adapted to that. And so this crept into my Chilean section, as did, I'm sorry. I'm at a loss here because this again, Australia. I thought I was showing all my Chile ones first, but this is a Calothamus quadrifotis, and that is here. And you can see it here. What's so great about it is how feathery it is, and it has often in the spring it'll have sort of rosy, fresh flowers on it. So it's not flowers, fresh growth. So it really is nice. And as a happy coincidence here, you can see it's also combined with these daisies, which are arctotis. So it's again understanding which plants work well together and trying them yourself, and just going to a nursery and say, oh, that's an interesting color. I want to try that one. That's again what we want to do with our garden plants. And again, this back to Australia. One of my, as I said earlier, I go to UC Davis to photograph the Botanic Garden quite a bit because it's a hot climate, and it's anything that works there. I can promote across other climates that are hot and dry. And this Acacia bourmanii, as you can see, is taken from the exact same spot 6 months apart. And so it feeds right into my concept of having plants that work throughout a season. You know, the annuals and perennials are great, but they tend to be peak at one time. So let's try to have plants that look good all the time. And it's not impossible if we as gardeners take care of them, if we understand when to prune them back. Something like this acacia, it probably needs to be thinned out. It's obviously multi-trunked, but you would have to thin out some of them to have that wonderful shape. So as a gardener, we have that intervention. It's our job to take care of the gardens and know what a plant should look like, or in some cases, what we want them to look like. I bet this plant could probably be sheared. I've seen our native manzanitas sheared in parking lots. I mean, that's I wouldn't do it, but it's still it's something that it can be done. And if you're in a small space of a parking lot, you want it to look like a hedge. Well, it's adapted. So let's learn what plants are adapted and use those, and instead of trying to find some plant, the traditional nursery traces, oh, this is a great hedge, use that. Well, no, it's not going to work for us. So again, it's up for us to find the right plants. Boy, this is jumping around. This is California natives, and which was, we'll see. I had sort of rehearsed about the climates of each of these places, and I'll see where this goes. I thought I previewed this morning, but anyway, this is a plant that I don't know if Annie sells today, but it's one of the most popular eriogonums because it gets big and has really red flowers. They're selling, yeah. So it's a great plant. And eriogonums in general, as native plants, are widely adapted. They're from we can find eriogonums from all across California. And again, so if you want to use native plants, find the local sources for them, your local native plant society, or in some cases, Annie's knows which plants are adapted across wide ranges. And this one I've seen from the coastal to inland gardens. It's really well adapted. You don't have to have the exact ecotone where this is native to for it to work in your garden. And it's also fun For me as a photographer, finding them in different places here, the red flowers against the agave behind it, just it made a, I oftentimes, my work, I want to get at the level of the plant to take its picture. It's like a portrait of somebody. You don't take a picture of a portrait looking down on their head. You should look straight into them. And so most of the time for plant portraits, I try to look them straight on and get a relationship of the plant feels to itself, not just what we see from 5 or 6 feet up. Um, this ceanothus is an opportunity to talk about understanding when you buy a plant how big it's going to get. This is Ceanothus Ray Hartman. Okay, so if you want one, it gets big. It's beautiful blue flowers. It's tough. It's one of the toughest of all the Ceanothus. I see it in many gardens. I have it in my garden. It's a great plant, but it gets big, and so you need to know that. If you don't want a big one, there are others that stay smaller. Again, it's up to you to decide. I see an interesting story on this particular one. This photo was taken at UC Botanic Garden in there, but I have it in my own garden, and I planted it 20 plus years ago, and then it got way too big. I planted it in a native plant section. I live on a hillside, and the plant got so big. I mean, literally, it was 12, 14 feet tall. It was shading what I had planned for around it. So I said, I got to cut it back. Well, I asked perhaps the leading expert in the world about California native plants, Bart O'Brien, who was in charge of the Tilden Native Plant Garden, what to do. He said, you got to replace it because you shouldn't prune Ceanothus when the stems get any bigger than this. It won't respond to pruning. So I said, well, I don't want to take this sucker out. So I pruned it back really hard. I had some branches that were this big that I cut back. And what happens when you cut it back like what, you get lots of sprouts. 12, 15 new little sprouts come out. And I, not painstakingly, but I carefully thinned those out so that it did recover, and had Bart come back over and say, Bart, I think it worked. But it took a lot of time, and it took, because I had to do that because it got so big. I knew it was big. I'd seen it for years. It's a very popular native shrub, but I didn't know it got that big in my garden. And so, but it did. And so it can be cut back. And I think actually this photograph here is probably 3 or 4 years ago when they redid that new Julia Morgan building there. They replanted it with natives. And they've since replanted it again because this got too big. So it's a caution. If you have space for it, it's a fantastic, tough, beautiful native shrub. It just gets big. So that's, pardon? It grows really fast too. Yeah, no, well, we'll get to that when we talk about some other plants. Depends on how you take care of it, so how much water, where you put it. And so here is a wonderful Arctostaphylus called emerald carpet, I think. Can you guys actually see? Probably not in the back. Anyway, emerald carpet is we see it cascading over a rock wall because it's a prostrate. It's a very low growing manzanita. And so it's evergreen, so it's a useful plant to have in gardens that are both native and adapt to our climate. It's evergreen. It can do fine in a small space, but it can also do in a large space, because it's so low and spreads, it can become a lawn alternative, so to speak. If people have a green, designers in a design like to have a green shape in the front of their houses. It doesn't have to be lawn, right? It could be green, it could be something else. It could be a ground cover. So the same plant, depends how you, the gardener, want to use it, can make it do different things. And again, that's why it's fun for me to, my work over I've been doing garden photography for 30 years, to see these things and say, wait a minute, that works. I'm not a professional botanist. Have no horticultural training. I'm a photojournalist and a historian. I don't really know I love plants, but I do see things, and I want to see gardens that are mature, gardens that have been sustained. We say, oh, we buy all these right plants, we're doing a sustainable garden. Well, the proof is in the pudding, not when you put it in. The proof is a generation later. Has it been sustained? Did it take care of itself? Again, the gardeners need to help make it happen, but I'm, as an observer, I'm finding gardens that have been maintained. This garden has been maintained and it's been taken care of. And so the whole emerald carpet manzanita, which takes no water at this point, when it's established, takes no water, is that shape of a green lawn instead of a lawn itself. So again, it's understanding what's going to happen with it. Here's another great example of a lawn substitute. If you want that green look, this is Baccharis native plant pigeon point. Pigeon point stays pretty low to the ground, which is why it's from Pigeon Point on the coastal areas. And when the trade first got it into cultivation, they were concerned that it was low at Pigeon Point because of the wind conditions and the tough. But actually, it's evolved. That this particular selection has evolved to stay low. So Baccharis Pigeon Point stays small, and it can become a ground cover. And here interspersed with some more Anaxanthus, and I think these are all drought adapted summer dry plants. And it's again up to you as a gardener to decide which substitutes you use to override what I call the traditional English look. We've been bombarded for most of my life until quite recently, really. The garden books show English gardens and East Coast gardens. And they're all lovely, but they don't apply to us. And it's deceptive to show those gardens in books and magazines here and have us say, oh, I want to do that. Well, you can't do it, or without a lot of intervention and water and special pruning or fertilizing. We need more examples of gardens that have been adapted and have been sustained here. And so that's my job. And that's so fun to share it with you guys. The Achilles, I know in Annie's catalog, there must be 4 or 5 of them that are available because the colors change year to year. It's the seasonality of with the hybrid, the big boys, the big hybridizers that come up with different colors. Here's one garden where both the white one, which is this natural color, and a cultivated one. I'm not sure rosea, but it's obviously not the native, straight from the native, but it's great that the big hybridizing industry is able to take gene splicing or selections and find one that's redder and redder and create one. I find it exciting. We can have a discussion with those of you who object to the whole industry of plant breeding, and there's legitimate concerns about that. But it does, if you know what you're doing, it does allow a lot of new introductions that we can take advantage of here. The Achilles, there's one that's one of my favorites. It's called a paprika. It's sort of a terracotta color. It's really lovely, and it just changes. So again, it's great to go to places like Annie's that will have multiple choices, so that you can say, "Well, I don't want a red one. I'd rather have a yellowish one, or I really want the native straight white one." It's great to have those choices. And as gardeners, that's why I love working with gardeners as opposed to architects, because the gardeners have that really understanding of how great plants can be. Okay, this is another example of a manzanita. This is my garden, and I'm going to show it. I just took this picture recently because I had, I forget why, but there was another shrub between where I'm standing and this manzanita. There was another shrub that I had to, literally, it got too big. I had to take it out. But what it did is it helped reveal the branch structure of the manzanita. This is one called Monica. It's huge. It's native to Sonoma County, and you can find it in a lot of places. I don't know if Andy's selling it this year, but it has to be maintained. Most manzanitas die back, and there's a lot of dead wood on them. But if you take care of it and cut that dead wood back, you get a branching pattern revealed, and it's a beautiful mahogany color, and it peels in the summer. It's really lovely. But here's this. This is I've never done this before to an audience. I hope for the next photo you'll say, "Oh, that's the same plant." In the spring, it's covered with flowers, and so that's the same plant from the other direction. So in this picture, I'm in my driveway. I planted a whole bunch of manzanitas on my driveway 25 years ago, and not realizing how big they got. And now I'm not paying a price. I can't park next there anymore. And so I parked out the end of the driveway, which is fine because I get to have this at the other end. But if you look through this photograph, you see the green behind. That's my bulb meadow. This is taken in the spring. The Arctostaphylos flowered in late January and February. You look through there and imagine looking back. that's looking back toward it in the now. Whereas, but it allows multiple functions depending on where you look for it in the garden, and it's something that I didn't anticipate. And this, I'm thrilled to have learned it, but I didn't realize when I planted this that one day when I first planted this plant, it was small, and I thought I have a hedge. I wanted to get big. I wanted to be a 6 or 8 foot hedge to protect the driveway from the garden, but I didn't realize how big it was going to get. So anyway, let's keep moving on. This is Austrameria Indian Summer is a Chilean plant. Maybe somehow I'm jumping around, but it's another great example of the industry breeding plants and what what the industry does to introduce plants. Um, some of these are called Peruvian lilies, but Austromerias are native to Chile. I've seen them, and there are lots of them. They're fairly small, but the hybridizers have realized they're really adapted to dry climates, and so there are lots of ones available. And they have this one here is Indian Summer. It's been out for about 5 years now. It's everybody I talk to wants this one because it doesn't stop blooming. If you water it. I have it planted in my garden. I have it in a pot in my garden because I water it regularly, not every day, but I keep it watered because I want it to flower all the time. Whereas if you put it in the garden, it will go summer dormant and won't flower. So it's, again, figuring out what you want to do with the plants and how much resources and water and time you want to give to it. But this is, everyone I know literally who's growing it can't get enough of it. And it's usually out of stock. I may buy all these myself. Not really, but it's a lovely plant. But what you see here in this, I don't remember where I photographed this exact one, but it does flower for a long time if you keep it watered. But it will also go dormant. But I wanted to mention it was bred in the Netherlands. The Dutch have a huge horticultural industry, and they do a lot of breeding and gene splicing and all sorts of weird stuff about plants because it's their job to sell as many as they can. And this was created in a hybridizer in Netherlands, and it had a really funny name when it first came out, PS522 or something like that. That's what it was sold as. And then, as what often happens in the retail and even the wholesale nursery trade, things get renamed. It creates a buzz, a marketing buzz. It's one of my pet peeves. The same plant gets renamed by someone else, and it's the same plant, but it has a new name. And so I think that shouldn't happen, but it does. Even the worst case now is the law has allowed plants themselves to be patented. So you can patent a plant and sell it and make money from it as a native plant. And you can call it, Saxon's favorite, and then suddenly you own it. And it's great for Indian Summer, where scientists did spend a lot of time and a lot of effort hybridizing it. Yes, you can patent that, but let's not, patent actual native plants. This is totally wrong. But that's a digression. Perhaps more plants from Chile, and this is the current in our newsletter. If any of you sign up for the Summer Garden newsletter, this will be the featured plant family for next couple of weeks when it comes out. And so we just wrote it, and I know it's actually live on the blog right now. The Puyas are surprisingly adapted to dry climates. They're bromeliads, they're terrestrial bromeliads, and they're really adapted to no water, but they have really thorny leaves, and so it's not something to plant near people. It spreads. There was a fun on that. If you go, any of you follow my Instagram account, there's been a nice conversation about it, and someone is saying it's a great barrier as a fence, and it also helps little dogs from coming into your property because they get lost in it. And so someone suggested these plants are carnivorous because they because rodents will get into, die, and provide their own fertilizer. So they're lovely plants. They're spectacular. This one is not even in flower. This is at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. And again, I think I've at least said privately to some of you, is one of my favorite gardens because Ruth spent her lifetime in that garden. It's very personalized. It looks like a personal garden. It doesn't look like a botanic garden. It's very personal, and things got moved around as needed. over her 50-year career, and still now with Brian Kimball and the staff there, really making it a showcase of a garden that has been sustained. So it's really fun for me to photograph it because clearly it's been sustained. How much it's been sustained and how much effort it took is, an open question. And it reminds me, I did a book a few years ago called The American Meadow Garden, which I really love doing. I love grasses, and I love doing this book. And I went on a speaking tour, and people would see pictures of meadow gardens. Say, oh, that's so great. I want to do that. They're so low maintenance. No, no, no. It's a meadow garden. Garden means maintenance. And so if you want a meadow garden, you need maintenance, especially when it gets started. It's just not, they're lovely, but they take work. And if you're a gardener, maybe you like that work, but you can't just have a meadow and think you're going to get something beautiful. Just like with these puyas, they take maintenance. They're going to spread out and take maintenance. And all the photos I'm showing are in gardens that have been maintained. And so it's easy to get distracted by me or any garden book, a lovely picture. Oh, I want to do that. Well, just remember, behind that photograph was a gardener who took care of it and put them together or pruned it or let it grow to scale or whatever it is. That's our job. And also our job is to try again if something dies. Oh, I'll move it over there on that side of that plant. Keep trying. We love to do it, but be informed. Try to find the plants that are really are going to be useful. This is another great Chilean plant. In fact, it's here. This is Azara. I've been warned not to get too close to that speaker, but this is the Azara, which has lovely yellow flowers in the spring, and really, it's from Chile. It is used to no summer water, so once it gets established, it'll be fine. We had earlier someone mentioned that their Ray Hartman, ceanothus, didn't respond the way I showed. But when you water the plants initially, they'll grow pretty fast. You don't want to overwater them because you'll tease them. They'll be dependent upon water. But the first year or two, you can water and they'll grow to scale, and you cut back as needed. One of my favorite examples in the garden world are phormiums. Phormiums are really well adapted to dry climates. But most people water them too much, and they get so big that they can't be taken out. Almost, they get huge. I have them in my garden, and I don't water much. I think of two places in my garden. I have the same phormium for 15 years. It's still pretty small. It gets almost no water, and so it's up to you when you buy a plant or in your garden to understand the maintenance required or not. I mean, to get plants established, they'll need water to start. This is our needs water to get started. So that they need water to get started. Where if you overwater them, they'll grow too fast, and then when you try to cut back, they'll be stressed out. So it's a balance that we all are learning, and we talk to each other, what's working, what doesn't work. This is another one of the puyas. This is actually there's a fantastic new botanic garden. This is the Ventura Botanic Garden right along the coast in Ventura. It's about 15 years old, but it was destroyed in one of the fires about 8 years ago. But it's a really excellent garden, and it's organized by the summer dry climates of the world. This is in the Chilean section. It's one of the puyas that I think is in Annie's catalogs. I don't know whether it's here today, but again, you notice here, the gardeners planned it to have plenty of space. When it's flowering, it's sort of falling over in this case, but it needs space, and it needs to be away from the public. The spines are so strong, but it's a great plant. I love the silver gray foliage. It takes no care. It works well with softer plants. Like grasses work well with strong plants. That intermingle is something we learn as gardeners. But we have to understand the characteristics of the plants to start with. This is another shot of my garden. This is the Chilean wine palm, this has been in my garden for 25 years. It's pretty big, but it's not huge. They can get to be really big. I've had to cut back. You can't really see, but these get so big they go out into the pathway and become for me, I've walked into it more than once and been frightened. Like, whoa, that was a close call. So I've had to limit up. But my point in showing it here is it's not, after 25 years, it isn't that tall. I'm sort of pleased to say it's making exactly the statement I wanted it to make. I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. I don't know. It probably might be too big, or I might just have to limit up entirely and let it let it form a trunk. But it's, again, it's understanding that it's still a pretty big plant. I wanted this state. I love this exuberance of the fronds. So I wanted that from the get go. But I don't water it very much, and so it's still working. As an aside, my wife really doesn't like the weeping purple beech next to it. I sort of like the weeping purple beech, and what's fun about in my garden, it's a different watering system. It's in a row, it's in a border, but the beech gets watered regularly. The palm does not. And now, actually, over time, the roots have sort of gone all over the place, and so they're talking to each other. But it's a way you can put plants that are pretty different together. I once called this my tropical border because I wanted a foliage plant that looked tropical without actually being moist. So I put different colors together, and the purple leaf beech is a surprise. It's still there. It's another distraction. I don't know how our time's going to go. If you guys have to walk away, but some plants that are not from summer dry climates do quite well, as we have found out by just trying them. Japanese maples, they're from Japan. Once they're established, I love them. They get literally no water in my garden. They look great. One of my favorite example, my front yard is planted for fall color. I planted about 12 different trees and shrubs just for fall color because I want to prove you can do it in California. Because I've seen it. I've seen people do it, so I want to do it myself. One of the most surprising trees is Nyssa sylvatica, a tupelo tree, which is native to swamps in the east. Well, it's not going to do well here. Well, it's the most amazing fall color of any shrub. I have a lot of choice plants. The tupelo is the most colorful. And it's because it grows, I'm told by scientists, in an anaerobic situation in bogs. It doesn't expect to grow in the summer. It sort of goes dormant, anaerobic in the summer. I don't understand the chemistry of this exactly, but it's a tough tree. And once you get it in the ground, it'll survive. And there's so many great tough trees that once you get them in the ground and established, they can sail through years of drought. And we've had problems. I live in Novato, in North. It's pretty Novato. I live in North Marin. So Southern Marin is more like this area. It's more temperate. And there's more fog and marine influence. North Marin is closer to Napa as far as it gets really hot. We over 100 in the summer and whatnot. So yeah. So but we get in a good year we get adequate rain. We'll get 30 inches of rain. So that's also part of the equation of why it's important to understand where you garden and what you do with it. When this book first came out, and I'd do the talking circuit, and someone would say, "Oh, well, that's all well and good, but my situation, I have clay." And my first reaction is, "You're lucky, because clay holds water." And so, if you live in a sandy area, there are a lot of plants you can't do because unless you change your soil, the water runs through it. In clay, especially amended clay, I mulch a lot, so I have a lot of organic mulch. So the soil holds a lot of water that it helps most plants sail through the summer. And so that's, again, understanding the importance of watering in the wintertime. So that's when the plants expect to get hydrated, and their roots and the tissues expect to get hydrated, water in the winter. And these trees, the tupelo, the pistache, the maples, they do great. Once they're established, they take literally no water. And so it's just a matter of how much water you give them is also important to learn and listen to the plants. This is a plant is on the flyer that Annie's did for the show. It's another great example of a hybrid plant. This lavender, variegated lavender, has become really popular. I've seen it increasingly in the past 5 years around the area of all of California. And it's an example of a plant that was cultivated by the nursery industry. It's a cross between, I think, 3 other lavenders, and then the variegated one came out. But the Alardii cross it turns out, is really well adapted to our climate. But it was created in the lab, so to speak, by the nursery industry trying this and that and testing and trying it, and then say, oh, this one seems to work. And in this particular case, one of my heroes in this whole world is not here today. I was hoping she would be, Janet Sluice. So if you may know Janet, she runs the Sunset Western Plant Collection, which is not Sunset Publishing, they have a marketing agreement with Sunset to help promote their plants. But Janet is a nursery woman herself, and she's been working with a group in Alabama called the Plant Development Services. It's one of these huge companies that tries and works with plants. And then Janet's job is to work with their introductions to see what works in California. And so the Sunset Western Garden Collection is a marketing tool for Sunset, but the plants are Janet's, and not her specifically, but she has decided which ones to introduce to the trade for us. And this is one that she brought in. In fact, this plant next to it is another. This is actually their demonstration garden that she created up at Cornerstone Nursery years ago in Sonoma. And so the foil here is another Sunset salvia called Wine and Roses. It's a dark red salvia that looks well. But so my point in all this is that I love native plants, and I want to do them as much for habitat and the whole ecosystem as we can. But there are a lot of plants that are not native that are well adapted. And I'd love to have an argument with this offline, but we living here in a human ecosystem. Cities are human ecosystems, and we need to make them livable for humans. Yes, we need to take care of the critters. Of course, we need to take care of the critters, but we're critters too, and we have to live in cities. I mean, there are 8 billion of us now, and by 2050, 75% of the world is going to live in cities, and so we need to understand that cities are human ecosystems, and we have to have plants that work in cities. And if the plant breeders of the world make that happen, God bless them. Let's not have plants that destroy plants or poisonous or invasive, but let's work with the industry to have plants that work for cities, that can take the heat, that can take the deprived soil condition, the heat reflection. All those things are things that the nursery industry is working on for the sake of cities, especially urban farmers. And that's what gets lost in all this talk about. I'm an ecologist, so I love this conversation, but cities are human ecosystems, and we are the dominant species there. For better or for worse, let's recognize that we are the dominant species in cities. When you get in the suburbs and rural areas, for God's sake, don't get distracted by a beautiful plant that might be invasive or might not work. But let's honor the plants that come from the trade that are actually adapted to us. So move on. The blue. This is a little festuca. Festuca. This particular one is come from the Sunset Western Plant Collection. I don't know which one it is. It looks like it could be. Elijah Blue is not Sunset plant, so I don't know what it is, but it's a small blue fescue. There are a lot of them in the trade. Another great plant that came from the nursery industry. This particular cultivar I photographed at a trade show years ago. I just loved it. It was similar to one that Annie sells called Ghost, which is a bicolor lavender stachys, which is a French lavender, and she sells one that's say she. Annie's not here anymore, but it's still Annie's. It's still a she place. So I included that here because it's lovely, and the fat sort of flower stalk is typical of the stachys type of lavender. And lavenders in general are really well adapted. I don't have any photographs of it, but I planted a hedge similar to this in my driveway, not for the flowers. I mean, because when I cut it back, it's a really low silver gray hedge along my driveway. Once the flower stalks are pruned off, it gets no water all summer. I wish it didn't flower this year, so I think because I didn't water any this spring, it might have affected it. But it's a great plant, and it's Mediterranean in origin, and it's one of those plants we learn what are adapted to us, and the Mediterranean plants. There really are a lot of great Mediterranean plants. And I don't fault the term Mediterranean gardening for misleading people. I just wanted to expand that. But nonetheless, there's some great plants from the Mediterranean, and because the Dutch and the English are such great gardeners, they have learned what Mediterranean origin plants are adapted to gardens, and they're sharing that with us. So there's a lot of teucriums. This one is Botanicum, which again is in Annie's catalog, is a great teucrium, but there are a lot of teucriums that are small. You can make hedges out of them. They're gray foliage ones, from all various parts of the Mediterranean region that are adapted to us. And so it's oftentimes, an indicator that if the people in Europe, the Mediterranean regions, have introduced a plant they've probably been tried for generations. It's probably pretty good. So my work is to expanding that palette to beyond the Mediterranean. The times, there's elephant thyme. Actually, this picture, there are two times. One of the thyme is really small, the elephant thyme, and there's another thyme growing up around the center of that focal point. I don't remember which one that is, but the point of showing this picture is that thymes are not universal. They're different ones. So like earlier I was talking about manzanitas. They're big ones, they're small ones. You can't go to the nursery and say, oh, I've always wanted to have a manzanita. You've got to know which one. With thymes, there are a lot of thymes. Some get taller, some are spreading, some are purely for culinary use. There are a lot of different thymes. The culinary thyme, Salvia officinalis, is really beautiful. If you let it flower and get big, most people who grow it culinarily, they pluck it, they shear it back. But there are a lot of different ones. And again, that's what's the fun of being a gardener, is trying to find what works. And then I would also hope that we share that, amongst the, oh, well, I didn't expect that to work, but it looks great. And then we all learn from each other by sharing what's working. This Arctotis, this is this one here being sold is again, this whole plant system. This is South African, and I've jumped from Europe to South Africa, I guess. But anyway, it's on the list. And I won't beat it to death, the idea that the industry hybridizing so many plants. But I will say, I made most of my career. I'll just be blunt. I made a lot of money from the industry trade. They would photo the Arctotis is one classic example because it's a really popular landscape plant. The industry, the really big guys, Syngenta, Sakata, the people in the Netherlands, they have huge departments that hybridize plants and trying to figure out what they have trials. Every year there's called California Spring Trials. And they'll show, in this case, there may be 10 new Arctotis. They're slightly different colors. They bloom a little bit taller, a little bit shorter. There are all these different hybridizing things that they do to hopefully adapt it to the new trends, new colors. They assume it'll be turned over and there'll be new things next year, but they want to show you the new stuff. And Arctotis is a classic example. And what I like to say is they would grow literally millions of plants for me, so for one picture, because that's the picture they want to go in the catalog. They do have the industry people come through and they'll look at all the trials and say, oh, we like the light pink one, or we like the one that's a little bit shorter, or one year there was a new plant, I forget which one it was, but it was being bred because they knew they were going to sell it as a cut flower in grocery stores. And they knew that ethylene from bananas was going to change how the plant looked in the grocery store. So the scientists had bred that with that understanding for the grocery store market. There was a snapdragon, I think Annie's carried it for a while, they spent years propagating. Snapdragons are a really popular annual plant. But they get in a nursery, what happens inevitably is the customer leans in over the counter and says, oh, I want that one, that 6-pack. And when they pull it out, if the plant is mature, they're ripping apart all the other ones. So the industry created one called Sweet Pea or Little Towers or something that grew more upright, specifically for the nursery trade, so that when customers got their 6-pack, they didn't destroy the rest of the display. So that kind of industry time and money spent on thinking what gardeners want, and sometimes not understanding what gardeners really want, is a huge trade. And they come up with new kinds of Arctotis all the time, and they don't repeat. Sometimes you'll find they're not stable. But they're not created to be stable. They know people are going to only want them for a couple of years, so they'll replace them. That's why it's both fun and sad that the nursery trade caters to that in some cases. They know a new color is going to be more popular next year, so they take out all the ones that everyone loved. This one. This one, I mean, is called Pink Sugar. Well, Pink Sugar has a nice sort of glaucous leaf to it. It was next year they'll have a pink rainbow. Well, pink rainbow might have the exact shade of pink, but it might be a different color of foliage. And so you, the gardener, said, oh, I love that one I got 2 years ago. You can't find it anymore because the big boys in the nursery aren't propagating it anymore. So it becomes frustrating, but it's also exciting to go to nurseries and see the new stuff. Like, oh, I never knew you could have this color, in an Arctotis. So Anyway, it's fun, to work and incorporate different things. This plant is also an Australian plant, a South African plant. I can't plant Phyzospermum. It doesn't have a common name yet. This was photographed at Leaning Pine Arboretum down in San Luis Obispo. They have a great garden organized by Plants of the World. And you can see plants, because they have a horticultural department, they're doing it with the intention of showing people what will work. And so the horticultural trade will pick up all these things and bring them in. I just love the silverness of this one. Another plant, Osteospermums, like the Arctotis, get hybridized to death in the trade. And when you find one you like, don't think you're going to get it next year. Buy it that year and treat it almost like an annual. Put it in a spot in this garden. I know this garden really well. By this wall, there's a irrigation outlet. It gets plenty of water. In the back of the garden are much more succulents. It gets almost no water. But again, as a gardener, it's you deciding where to put water and what parts of the garden get more attention than others. And sometimes plants are simply disposable, and that's the fact of it. Is another of my examples. Earlier, I talked about how that ceanothus will get so big. Well, if you love cute little succulents, right? You go to the nursery and say, "Oh, I love that cute little succulent." Well, give it a few years, and it doesn't take long. This is the Huntington Garden again. It's a fairly new part of their garden. They call it the African savanna, and it's the agave ferox is the dominant succulent there, and they get really big. The grass is Atlas fescue, Festuca mayeri, which is more from northern Africa, but it's still it fits in with the so-called African safari look of it. But some of you will notice I have copies of this book, the Hardy Succulents book, to bring. Which when the publisher first approached me to do it, I said, "Oh, I'd love to do that book. They're so photogenic and architectural. I would really like to do that book." And so, okay, well, let's meet the author, Gwen Kalidas. Well, Gwen is in Colorado, and at the time she was chair or president of the Rock Garden Society, the Succulent Society. And in our initial conversation, "Oh, I'm so glad that we can work together, but you can't photograph anything in California for my book, for our book." And wait a minute, I'm in California. How do you expect? But the point was, she said, the plants you grow in California get so big, it's not fair to show that in a book that's targeted to hardy succulents across the whole continent. We get spoiled here because we have mild climates and our succulents get really big with almost really no care. But if you live in Denver or I went to Connecticut for the job, you can't do that. They don't get that big. And it's misleading in a book to show, that and or not show that, and say, well, this is, you love the shape of that little cute little succulent at the yard sale or at the nursery. Well, so that book became really important to show gardens that were not outside of California. Some were in California, it turns out, but the point was we need to be a service to gardeners by not misleading them. I'm not saying this great picture, it's like the English garden books, you see a great picture, "Oh, I want to do that." No, you can't do that. So it's again, it's being aware of how big your plants get. I talked earlier about the puyas from Chile, how tough their leaves are. They're great and really tough, but you don't want to get near them as far as touching them. Oh, good. I have somehow it all sort of wrapped up.